All right, guys, here's the interview with Mark Lamonica. He joined us to talk about Chris Weidman. During the interview, I incorrectly identified his Twitter as at Mark Lamonica. It is, in fact, at Lamonica Mark. So go ahead and follow him. He's a great follow. It's at Lamonica Mark. It's correct on the graphic, but I got it wrong during the interview. So enjoy the interview. It's a great one, and I'll talk to you soon. On the Hot Cage podcast in the Flurry, he's the deputy sports editor for Newsday Sports and can be followed at Mark Lamonica on Twitter. He's Mark Lamonica. Mark, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. So you wrote two very interesting pieces in the lead up to this fight that can be read at Newsday.com. The one I want to discuss first is your comparison of Chris Weidman and Matt Serra. It's a simple question with a more complicated answer, I'm sure. What would lead the MMA public to believe that Chris Weidman won't suffer the same fate that Matt Serra did, first shocking the world, and then subsequently dropping the belt? So my question is, why is Chris Weidman different than Matt Serra, Mark?
Well, I think you have to look at the stages of their career they're at. You look at Matt Serra; he was an older guy. He had been through wars already. He had been through the fight game. He'd been through an Ultimate Fighter, and he'd been in the UFC for a while. He's probably 33, 34 when he won that title. You know, the way he explained it is that was his movie. That's the climax of the movie. You get a guy like Weidman. He's 29 years old. He's had 10 pro fights. You know, he's nothing but on his way up in this game. So I think you make the comparison there is a natural one. You know, both from the island, both major upsets, same trainer. Serra trains Weidman, but at this point when they won their fights, they're at completely different points in their career, and I think that's where the biggest difference lies.
Oh, so what changes have you seen in Weidman from the guy before UFC 162 and now the guy before this fight?
None in terms of the person and the personality. He's the same guy. He's the family guy. You know, nothing's getting in his head in terms of ego or nothing like that. He's always been that same guy, and I think that's kind of what helps him, especially he's surrounded with the same people. You know, he grew up on the island, he lives on the island, he trains on the island. He sees the same guys all the time. So I don't think anything has changed there. What I do see is different is his media presence. He's a lot more comfortable in the spotlight talking to people now than 6 months ago, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. You know, he's much more comfortable in that light now. And I think that's really the only difference that I've ever come across. Otherwise, he's the same dude, man.
Yeah, and prior to that fight, the first time, he seemed like a guy that just kind of knew something everybody else didn't know. Like, he went to Dana, said, I'm going to ruin all your super fight plans, and he kind of seemed like he was onto something. And I mean, obviously, it came to fruition. So do you think it benefits him fighting a rematch as his title defense?
I think so. I would think so. I mean, he spent 3-4 months training for that guy, and now another 6 months. So he spent the last year or so, since March, focusing training on the same guy. I certainly think it helps him that he's going up against Silva again because he's still an underdog. The latest odds I saw, he's an underdog. But even that's a gambling perspective. But just in the fight game itself, a lot of people still view him as, the underdog. And, he got lucky kind of a thing. And that's something that's, he's going to use to motivate himself and to fuel his drive even further.
Yeah, I think one of the underrated parts of his game is he's got a really, really strong mental game, not only in his his fortitude and sort of what he brings to the cage mental toughness-wise, but he's a well-thought-out fighter, much like Matt Serra. Those guys have game plans. I think they kind of get a little bit of a Long Island knucklehead rap, but they're smart guys and they know what they're doing in there. I mean, you don't get to be Matt Serra's level of jiu-jitsu without, having a good, strong head on your shoulders. So do you think that he's going to employ a similar game plan or start to play the what-ifs about how he thinks Anderson might change?
No, I think he's going to have a, I mean, the game plan's still the same with Silva. You got to try to get the guy down because that's where most people are going to have an advantage. And certainly, Weidman's a 4-time All-American, brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, you do the best, you do the fight on paper, he's going to have an advantage on the ground. So I certainly think you're going to look for that still because I don't know how much that's changed. I mean, maybe Silva's gotten far better at the ground game. I don't know. I haven't seen him train or anything like that. So I feel like the game plan and the blueprint is still the same. What happens, who the heck knows? But I I would envision something similar to the last fight. I mean, the first fight, Weidman got him on the ground and was working him for a little bit, and then it looked like in the first round maybe Silva had the advantage there in striking in the first round. Second round, I mean, obviously we all know what happened there, so.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So, and you kind of transitioning over to the other piece that you wrote, Weidman seems very motivated to silence his critics. Do you feel like that's a different motivation from the first fight, or is it sort of branches on the same tree?
Same tree, definitely the same tree. I mean, to me, I think the UFC's tagline on the poster says it all. Leave no doubt. And, here's the guy. A lot of it just stems from the fact that Anderson Silva never lost a fight in the UFC. He'd never been knocked out his career for 16 years. And here comes this guy with a relatively low profile. He had 9 pro fights, last 5 in the UFC. He gets a lot of buzz. He's been a prospect. He's, the next guy in, that kind of stuff. But he still had a fairly low profile in terms of marketing and all that kind of stuff. UFC doesn't really get behind him until he had the title fight and all that kind of stuff. And here he is now. He's a champ. He's certainly a much bigger profile. Everyone's saying, I mean, you remember everything people said after the first fight. It was a fluke. The fight was fixed. All that insanity. So now here comes Weidman. He's got the same motivation. Obviously, he wants to win the fight, but he also wants to cement his first win. And it's a fight here that he can certainly do that. If he beats Silva again, he's like, guess what? I just beat the best in the world twice in a row. He's doing something right,
That's true. Yeah.
And it's gonna certainly solidify his position in the division, in UFC, the pound for pounds, all that kind of stuff. Another win, and he's gonna all of a sudden Chris Weidman is now the champ. He's not the guy who beat Anderson Silva and then has to do it again to prove that he did it the first time.
That's true. Yeah, and much like another tri-state guy, Frank Edgar, after he beat BJ Penn, he had to go back and then take care of him again to let everybody know, okay, this wasn't just one great night I had and BJ had a bad one. So I'll get you out of here on this one. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but just to kind of put it in a nice little clean area here, how do you see the fight going on Saturday?
Ooh, I don't know. I think it's gonna be good. I don't like to predict fights with guys in our coverage area on Long Island because doesn't really benefit anybody there. It's kind of a lose-lose for me. If I pick them to win, I'm a homer. If I don't pick them to win, then I'm not picking them to win because I don't want to be a homer.
That's true.
But I think I see this fight going a little further than last year. I see Silva coming out almost like in the second Sonnen fight, where he came out and he was far more aggressive, wanted to let people know that said, hey, that first fight was that wasn't me, and it was the busted ribs that I had, and that made a big difference. And I'm going to destroy this guy. So I see Silva coming out far more motivated than he's ever been. Obviously, Weidman hasn't said the things that Sonnen has said. Sonnen said leading up to that fight with the whole barbecue and all that kind of silliness and the medium rare steak stuff, so that's not Weidman's style. But I think Silva's going to be certainly far more aggressive. I think you'll see some of his antics, just because that's his style. That's what he's done. He's fought like that for the last 6-7 years at least, So I don't see that changing much. He'll still try to get into Weidman's head. And then it's just a question of whether or not Weidman lets him in. He didn't let him in the first time. If you remember those weigh-ins from last year and then the press conference tips and all that silliness, Weidman never cracked.
Yeah.
And, I'd see, this fight gets stopped in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised. If it goes a distance, I wouldn't be surprised. I think what you'll see is you're going to see a motivated Weidman, regardless. He'll come in as if he's not the champ. Motivated as a challenger kind of a thing. And I think it's going to be a heck of a fight. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. And, I watched that fight flashback, and his dad, Charlie Weidman, was doing a prayer. I was ready to fight Anderson Silva. That guy can't motivate you. I don't know who can. So I agree with you. I mean, I'm of two minds of the whole thing because the one hand, I'm an MMA fan, so I kind of hold Anderson Silva's legacy, I cherish it on some level. But at the same time, I think Weidman's a great champion. I think he's a good representation of the sport, and he's everything you would want your champion to be. So like you said, I think that, it's going to be a hell of a fight on Saturday. Okay, there you have it, fight fans. He's the deputy editor of Newsday, a great follow on Twitter at Mark Lamonica. He's Mark Lamonica. Mark, thanks for your time, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, man. Take care.